Okay, today I'll be covering Amish education. A few of my topics are where schoolhouses begin and the administration for these schoolhouses, approach to education, content and curriculum, differences in classes, the teachers, funding, legal issues, and I'll cover a few of the class questions for this topic. So this is where the schoolhouses begin and the administration of these schoolhouses. Many Amish communities provide parochial schools for their children. Parochial means Christian school, pretty much. So, for example, I know a few schools around here, like Troy Christian, Xenia Christian, schools like that. Um, a local farmer usually donates the land, and the community will assist in building it. Uh, they usually donate a lot of the inside decorations or whatever helps the kids learn. Schools are governed by a school board made of local parents and children in attendance at that school. Yes, that sounds weird, but there are some children on the school board usually. That's just to keep the school up to expectations for these kids. Um, for example, I would want to have a say in what goes on in the school I attend. Um, The board deals with anything from students with learning disabilities to disciplinary reasons. Uh, for that, sometimes they get another teacher, which this would be a third teacher, because they have two teachers for the older students and younger students, which I'll cover later. But they can also hire another teacher to follow around and help these mentally challenged or kids with learning disabilities. They also help with hiring, the board members do. So that's a few of their duties. They also deal with finances for the schoolhouses and salaries for the teachers. Um, that's about the only thing that is paid for in the school is the teachers. Other than that, everything's pretty much a donation, like meals, which we'll talk about later also, and supplies. Those are usually donations, but teachers usually get paid for this. This slide covers the approach to education. Amish are strong believers in education, but only provide formal education through the 8th grade. Some do go on to advance their studies and finish out high school or go to college, but most of the time you see that happening, they leave the church and decide to live a different life. Most Amish kids are homeschooled in a community schoolhouse. There are times the kids don't have this option and are forced to go to a public school. This sometimes becomes a problem because most families still speak Pennsylvania Dutch at home. I went to school in a small school here in Ohio with a few German Baptists. I know it's a little different than Amish, but there are a bunch of similarities. They stopped going to school in 8th grade also. So I kind of have an understanding for what they're talking about here. Um, they also didn't have a problem with the Pennsylvania Dutch because they spoke predominantly English, but I completely understand uh, where they could have problems speaking with the speaking Pennsylvania Dutch. Okay, the content curriculum for Amish communities. Amish schooling concentrates on the basic reading, writing, math skills, along with vocational training and socializing in the Amish history and values. What this pretty much means is they worry about what they need in the future. They don't do what most public schools do. They really emphasize Amish history. They even have Bible study throughout times of school. They make sure you know your culture. So this is actually a pretty big part of their schooling is the Amish history. They also get recess breaks to go out and use some of their energy. Um, they play volleyball or kickball outside and during During winter, they usually go inside and play board games. Uh, School's not all year round for them. Some do have all year round, but most of the time it's just from fall to spring pretty much. The kids usually pack their lunch, but sometimes the mothers work together and make them hot lunches. Mothers usually do this about 2 to 3 times a week. It keeps mothers involved, and it keeps the kids interested and not wanting to go home all the time. This slide's about differences in classes. There's actually a few differences because they pretty much split the schoolhouse into 2 rooms, or they use a curtain to separate them. The reason they do that is they usually split up 2 separate classes, splitting them into an older group, which is usually grades 5 through 8, and a younger group, grades 1 through 4. Have 2 different teachers for each group. Like I said in about the second slide, they usually have another teacher follow around kids that are struggling or have issues to help them with their studies. The older students often help the younger students after their own classes. They usually actually make this part of the older kids' grades, so they're pretty much forced to tutor the younger kids. But it sounds like, from what I've researched, they don't struggle with this because most of the time it's their own siblings because of all the big families. So I think it's a pretty good idea they do this. It keeps all the kids together, and maybe they can have a little fun out of it. Teachers at the Amish schoolhouses. Many of the Amish school teachers are young women who are just a few years out of school themselves. They usually teach a few years until they are married. The school board often has trouble finding teachers because this adds onto women's responsibilities. By that I mean, after school, women are expected so much out of them, and usually they're expected more than what they were whenever they were in school. So usually the parents don't cut any slack, even though they're teaching a class. So they still have to come home and have to do a lot of chores around the house. So this tends to add up on young ladies, from what I've seen. It is rare to see a male teacher, but they will step up as a replacement if needed to. That's actually a pretty big part in this slide because, like I said in the point above, the school board has trouble finding teachers to fill positions. So every once in a while they'll find a male to do it if he's willing to, if he's not super busy. But most of the time you don't see that, and the women end up taking over the schoolhouses. Okay, so school funding, this is pretty much cut and dry, so bear with me a little bit. Most school funding is donations, like what I said earlier in this presentation. Most of the donations come from community, including landowners and giving the land and resources it takes to build the schoolhouses. Usually Amish carpenters do the building themselves, maybe have help from others. The board members work to find money for the schools, whether it be donations or another source of money. I couldn't really find anything to see if they do any like fundraising, which I highly doubt they do any fundraising, but to me, I wouldn't see any other way of getting any income. So maybe they do, I'm not sure. But most of the time, this is all donations, and part of the church is funding this also. The school legal issues are also pretty much cut and dry. Amish students are exempt from the state compulsory attendance beyond the 8th grade based on religious principles. This was decided in court in 1972 in the Wisconsin versus Yoder case. This was in May. It pretty much covered why Amish kids are stopping their education at 8th grade. And it went into a state court for a pretty good amount of time, and they pretty much decided it is backed up from their religion, and they understand their thinking on it. So from what I read, it's okay. It's allowed around the states of America. Okay, I'll start to break down some of these class questions. First one is, are boys and girls pushed the same to go to school, or is one gender forced more? Both boys and girls are held to the same standards. The only difference is that the females are expected to come back to school after graduation to help teach until they are married and ready to start a family. Like I covered in one of the previous slides, obviously the women are expected to come back, but if they can't, then they're forced to find someone else. So they aren't really pushed in any way, but they would like and they recommend the ladies that graduate to come back and teach classes. Second question is, do the Amish have guidelines for their educational systems, such as specific reading or classes? Their schooling is pretty much similar to public schooling in the sense of classes. It's just a little more chopped out, like there's no science-y type classes or really history type classes except Amish history. They take the general math and reading classes, also writing, but they take Amish history also. So, like I covered in one of the previous slides, this is a big part in their schooling to make sure the kids understand the culture they are being brought up in. They also take time to read the Bible. A lot of times the kids are told to go home and do homework about the Bible, read certain parts, come back and talk about it the next day. They only teach the kids things that are beneficial to their future. Like a lot of it is mathematical type things for the males and some things like that. Another class question I got is, do the Amish go to college? I think I covered this before also. All kids have the option to advance their studies. They rather them not, because this is part of the Amish community, and that's just to worry about getting it done after the 8th grade and then going and helping the family on the farm. So they don't believe in schooling after the 8th grade. You do see some kids drop out, like I said, and but that once they drop out, I mean they usually don't come back. They have their eyes set on a bigger goal. So that's pretty much it for this presentation. Here's my resources. I really enjoyed this. I feel like I learned a lot. That's all.